Yeah.
Welcome to Focus on Health, a series of educational programs highlighting current health issues sponsored by the Department of Nursing at Salisbury University. I'm Dr. Mary DiBartolo, Professor of Nursing at Salisbury University and host of the program. Joining me today is my dear friend Kathy Wool, my favorite dietitian.
Thanks,
You've been
Mary.
on the program several times, and of course you are a registered dietitian with the Worcester County Health Department.
Yes, I am.
And we are doing the second part of a series we started a while back on reading nutrition labels. Because you are what you eat. It's important to see what you're eating.
There's a lot to talk about.
Particularly here in the dairy department, and we are filming here from Giant in Salisbury, who were nice enough to allow us to come in today.
Yes, and they did a great job. They've got a lot of products to choose from, a lot to teach people about, so it's a perfect venue.
And I believe we're going to start with the yogurts.
Sounds good.
Let's head on down.
Well, you can see, Mary, that there's a great variety of choices here. It almost seems like it could take you a full day to pick out the yogurt that you really wanted to eat. And you know, there's more and more varieties coming out, there's more and more additions to yogurts. And I think what people really need to know primarily about their yogurt is what do they really want when they eat this food. It is amazing that you can take something as healthy as a yogurt and make it unhealthy by all the additives and the things that they put in them. I know a lot of people talk about, you know, let's read the label and figure out what's in them. And one thing that really is clear on a yogurt label is trying to figure out what is the fat content, what is the sweetening, what is the sugar constitution of this product. Because believe it or not, when you read the sugars on a container of yogurt, you have to subtract out the lactose that comes from the dairy product itself. Because lactose is a natural sugar, it's in the milk. So when people see 20 grams, they really have to remember that 12 of that is naturally in here. The additional is what they add into the yogurt. And when you're trying to figure that out, what people should do is subtract 12 out of every grams of fat they see on a label. The remainder, you can divide it by 4, and that will tell you the number of teaspoons of sugar.
You mean sugar?
Of regular, like, additive sugar.
Okay.
And if you read your label, you can find out, did they add high fructose corn syrup? Have they added another sweetener? And one thing they're doing with yogurts is, you know, there's low fat, fat-free, then there's the ones that are sweetened with sugar substitutes. So which one do you really want?
Well, this one here says 25 grams of sugar. So tell us how you would calculate that.
25 grams of sugar means let's take 12 out because that's the natural. So we have essentially 12 left, which means 3 teaspoons of sugar have been added to this. But you also want to pay attention to what is the saturated fat content after you look at the total fat. And that's a little harder for people, but down one side of your label is a percentage. And I always remind people to use the 5-20 rule. 5% means it's low, 20% means it's high.
As far as saturated fat goes.
As far as saturated fat goes. So if this says saturated fat is 20%, you'll know that most of the fat in this yogurt is the saturated one and not the unsaturated.
Plus the other important concept you've mentioned before is serving size. And in the case of yogurt, one whole container is the serving size versus...
And you have to be careful because some of the larger containers, you're going to be measuring out your cup, your half cup. And that's a good point because if it says 4 ounces, you got to double everything on the label to make sure you're doing that. But you know, one thing about yogurt is it's going to give you more vitamin C, excuse me, not vitamin C, it's going to give you more calcium than even a glass of milk. So if you're really looking to, you know, support that bone health and not have to drink milk if you're not a milk drinker. And a lot of people who are lactose intolerant can tolerate yogurt, so they can get their calcium from another source. There's another thing in yogurt that's really a kind of a boost. It's got an amino acid that's the feel-good amino acid.
And so what is that?
Well, it's called tyrosine, but it makes you feel good. It's one of those amino acids that's just is a feel-good amino acid. So for, you know, for a healthy food, it's a great choice, but parents really need to also watch out because they're adding things like, you know, the sprinkles, where you know, they're on the top of it, M&Ms, all the things that make this a less than adequate healthy food. I always tell people it'd be nice to just buy the plain non-fat and add your own flavorings, because then you control it. You can add nuts, you can add your granola in the amounts that you want. Once you let the company do it, it's out of your hands what really goes into the product.
I know sometimes I buy plain yogurt and I'll just add a little honey to it just to give it a little sweetness, because I can't eat it, you know, without any kind of sweetness. And then of course, you know, granola. But then again, granola, you have to be careful with that too. That can be loaded with fat.
Well, and sometimes on some of the yogurts when they put fruit in them, it's not really really fruit. It's really more like a fruit jam, a fruit jelly, a fruit flavor. But you can see all kinds of yogurts now that say whole pieces of fruit. So there's lots of variety out there. It's just a matter of which one you're going to choose for the day. Now, as you know, the Greek yogurts are really
I was just going to ask you about the Greek yogurts.
Let's walk down to the Greek yogurts, because this is a whole different product now, and they are actually taking over the yogurt market. One thing about the Greek yogurts is they're much thicker. As if you've had one, you can tell. The water is out of them. What they do to Greek yogurt is they actually strain it multiple times, and they remove the whey. Now, whey is what adds carbohydrate to your foods, your dairy foods. Once they take that whey out, what you have is a much more concentrated protein source, a lower carb product, and it actually has more calcium and more protein than the regular yogurts.
So it sounds like it's better for you?
Well, it depends on what you're after. The thing about the Greek yogurts sometimes is, though, that the labels are only for 4 ounces, and so it's a double product. So if you're just looking at calories and weight control, you still want to be careful with it. But I've also noticed with some of the Greek yogurts is they're starting to get confusing again, because it's non-fat, low-fat. They're starting to do all the additives. My family is really adamant against the sweeteners, like aspartame. In fact, 2 of my family members do get stomach aches, and if you're eating, 3 or 4 yogurts a day, if that's going to be your calcium source, you start to have some of those GI discomforts. But most of our yogurts, including the Greek yogurts, are probiotic, which means they have live cultures in them. So
that's what probiotic means?
Probiotic is another, yes, it sort of says that it's going to add that healthy bacteria to your gut, which keeps your immune system going, keeps your digestion going. So as long as you read the label and it says it has live cultures, you'll know that that yogurt is probably going to add that. They're adding flaxseed to yogurts now, which, that's going to give you a nice dose of omega-3. It ups the fiber by, I think, almost 3 grams when they add that flaxseed in. But again, you have to be careful, because if they add the flaxseed, that's kind of a bitter flavor. So sometimes they have to add more sugar in order to make it taste good. So the Greek yogurts are a great product as well. Just, again, labels, and really kind of paying attention to what's in them and what you're really looking for.
Let's take a look at one. Now this has no saturated fat.
Now it must be, because let's turn it around and see. Does it say? Because I see it's a non-fat yogurt.
Oh, it's a non-fat. So that's what you have to read on the front.
That's right. If it's non-fat on the front, you're not going to have any fat on the back.
Now it has 19 grams of sugars.
So you subtract 12 out, so you're up to 7.
So that's a little less than 2 teaspoons of sugar added.
Yes, a little less than 2 teaspoons of sugar added.
For the whole container?
Because the serving size is the container.
Yeah, not many people eat just a half container of yogurt either.
Right,
so,
unless you're feeding small children and splitting it, but you're right. But it's funny that the yogurt companies don't figure out a way to let the fruit be the natural sweetener. Because, when I cut up bananas or peaches, I don't really have to add much more, or fresh blueberries. You get the sweetness of the fruit. But for some reason, we have developed our taste buds to really want that sweeter flavor. So wouldn't it be nice if they made this yogurt with, maybe a half a teaspoon of the sweetener?
Well, is that a general rule, though? When something doesn't have fat in it, then sugar's typically added, or no?
Yes, in yogurts it is. I see that a lot, because if it's non-fat plain, I've done it with a lot of my clients, they really just think it's too sour tasting. And so the companies have to, they're here to sell their yogurt. So they're going to add a little more sugar to it to make it
And there are some
better.
benefits to yogurt, as you mentioned, that are worth maybe the few extra
I think so.
calories
It is a
sugar.
healthy food, but I think because, as you can see, we have so many choices that you really have to be choosy on it. It reminds me of granola bars, because when they first came out, they were a little healthier. Now there's so many out there that you can actually pick one that appears to be healthy because it has all these things in it, but when you get down to the label reading, it's full of fat, full of sugar, full of calories, and it kind of loses its oomph from there. But I think
that's why it's important to know how to read labels.
it's important, huh? Absolutely. And when we started out and talked about how many choices we have here, to pick from now, it is amazing what this could take you a day to pick out what you really want.
And I see several with the granola on top,
Yep.
of course,
There's
M&Ms, and then of course
the Chips
there's a
Ahoy.
newer one that has fruit that you can mix in.
And it doesn't really matter typically, because I know these with the M&Ms in them, they're if I can get one out of here. They typically try to keep it not a very large portion, but you know that this is really going to change. And if you're going to have your children develop a taste for yogurt and they have to have the sweet candies in it, it loses its, I don't know, is it really a healthy choice then for them? Because a lot of these, when they're adding the candies and the sprinkles, it changes the product.
Well, the saturated fat jumped way up to 13%.
Because now you have to include the chocolate and the M&Ms.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then sugars are 27 grams.
Mm-hmm.
Mine is 12, divided by 4. Okay.
Yeah. So I think if we're going to go back to talking about what do you recommend, it's looking at the non-fat to low-fat, looking at what is the saturated fat content, trying to keep it below that 5 to 8%, and trying to keep your calories within the realm of what you're trying to achieve. And then from there, pick out your fresh fruits to put in it, decide how you're going to sweeten it, if you can go with the plain, but really spend some time kind of deciphering what's available and what your goals are for eating the yogurt. But don't forget the health benefits,
right.
Absolutely.
And do you say Greek yogurt is better than the regular yogurt?
I won't say better, because for some people the goal is not to increase their protein, the goal is not to eliminate carbohydrates. It's more expensive for the most part, so if we're talking about your budget, it's better not to say it's better for you. It's just another choice that's out there for you. But now you know why it's higher in protein, and just the fact that they're lowering the carbohydrates, and it's a thicker product because they strain it so many times.
Yeah, I know some people don't like that thicker consistency.
No, you're right.
It's a personal choice.
Yes, yes. And you can actually make dips out of yogurt. You can actually use yogurt in a lot of your recipes that call for sour cream. You can actually take plain yogurt and to every cup add 2 tablespoons of flour, and that will be equivalent like to sour cream. Yeah, so you get rid of all the fat in the sour cream. Of course, now sour cream comes low fat, but if you really want to add the calcium, the vitamin D, go back to some of the protein, some of the healthier attributes of yogurt, why not use that in your recipes instead?
Yeah. And speaking of sour cream, shall we investigate that area?
Let's walk down there, yeah.
Okay. So Kathy, here we are in the sour cream section.
Well, and you know, we were just talking about sour cream and using yogurt in between, but you know what they've done with a lot of the sour creams now is they're making them not only the regular, the light, but also non-fat. So you have 3 choices of what you want to use in your products. So again, you're going to have to start reading your labels and check out what are you looking for? Are you looking for it to have no fat, or are you looking for it to have more flavor and a little of the fat? Because sometimes you can do both. You don't have to go fat-free all the time.
I know, I've tried the light. I really can't tell the difference.
I can't either. And I've used the fat-free in some products that I've made, but a lot of them, what happens is it's a little more watery, so it doesn't lend itself to some of your products that you're using. But you have to remind people that, you know, we have a lot of low-fat advice out there. And even if it's low-fat and light, we're still not encouraging people to eat more of it. You know, I think sometimes what happens with people is they see things that are light, they see things like it says fat-free, so we can eat more of it. But you know, all these fat-free, light, all the products, they still have calories in them. So even though we're getting rid of the fat, we're not getting rid of the calories. And if we're going to talk about part of weight management, it still has to come down to portion control and paying attention. If you're looking at cardiovascular health, definitely going to fat-free or a light product is going to be more to your advantage. But I wouldn't say to people, just because it's light, you can put 4 tablespoons on your baked potato, because now you're looking at the calorie load increasing as well.
Well, I also noticed that this is one of those products where the serving size is definitely, you know, not very much. It's small. On this one, it says 2 tablespoons, 7 servings for this whole container.
And you can imagine if you were making a dip out of this and people were putting chips in it, it's adding up. The fat's adding up very quickly. Because, you know, some of the ones, I mean the fat-free ones, they're low calorie, they're still the same tablespoons, and if you can get away with just doing the fat-free, obviously that's the best way to go.
Well, so that's fat-free, and that has, obviously no fat.
No fat.
This one here has 8% saturated fat.
So again, we're talking about the 5-20 rule. Remember, 5 is the lowest, 20 is high. So that's closer to that lower end, so not too bad. But as you pointed out, it has to be based on your portion size as well.
Now look at the difference there.
This one, yeah.
This is a regular. 17%.
17%
saturated fat.
So much closer to that 20, which is your cutoff point for looking at the 5-20 rule.
Of course, you get some calcium in this and some other
Well,
things,
very
but
little. It's
very
not
little.
really even considered a dairy product, believe it or not.
Oh, really?
It's not, no. It's really, if you look at it in the exchange system for foods, it's more a fat. Then you wouldn't want people to be using it as their calcium source because it doesn't really have that. And even things like cottage cheese, they're the same way. They come low fat, regular fat, small curd, light curd, 2%, 1%. It goes on and on and on. So again, deciding what you're using it for, how are you going to eat it, how does it fit in with the rest of your meals and your food choices for the day, and then you can pick and choose accordingly. But the marketing people, the food companies have made it much easier to select low fat, non-fat, regular, whatever you're looking for.
And this product here is actually labeled to remind people 33% fewer calories, 50% less fat than regular sour cream, which may help someone.
And certainly some grocery stores do a good job, especially with their own products, promoting them. And I think when we were talking about the yogurts, remember, the label should say contains live cultures. I don't know if we made that clear when we were talking about them, but they put it in a nice little box or stamp it on there so people know that it is one of the products that does have the live cultures. That does not apply to sour cream or cottage cheeses. So, yeah. But again, sour cream is a nice additive. People cook with it. It is a flavor enhancer. So if you're careful with the portion, you're careful with what one you choose, what you're doing the rest of the day, it can fit in quite nicely to the My Plate guidelines for eating healthy.
And wouldn't you say if you're using sour cream for dips, let's face it, we like dips in this country.
We do.
Using a light one or
Absolutely.
a fat-free, you really can't taste the difference that much.
Because once you put all the other flavors in it, it takes on the flavor of whatever you're adding to it. So if you're going to put onion soup mix in it or dill and onion, whatever, yes, it's going to take on the flavor. So those tailgating parties, the Christmas parties, we have holidays coming up, people probably should make the move towards the lower fat or fat-free products when they're making some of those holiday foods.
Well, very good. So where to next, Kathy?
Why don't we go down, while we're in the dairy section, let's go down and check out all the cheeses.
That can be mind-boggling.
There
Let's
we go.
And here we are, Kathy, in the cheese section. And of course, there's block cheese, there's sliced cheese, there's cheese food.
There's shredded. There is more. I will tell you, in all of my career, the one food that is the most difficult to get people to change on is cheese. It is a difficult food because people love it, and I think if we could get used to using smaller amounts, it would fit quite nicely into our diets, but we tend to use more of it. We have anything from the natural cheeses, which means they're aged, extra sharp. They will say cheese, natural cheese is going to be right on the label. And that's how you know that it is a real cheese versus something like a cheese food or a processed cheese.
Now this one tells you right on the front.
Right
you don't
on the
even
front.
have to turn it over to look at the calories and such.
And you're not really going to find a regular natural cheese that's low in fat unless it specifically says on the front of the label low fat, which means it's going to be made with part skim milk. Most cheeses are not even made, it says part skim, not all skim, which means some of them don't really reduce the fat that much, but it will be somewhat of a reduction. And the advice to give to most consumers is enjoy your cheese, but use less of it. It's always a good idea to shred cheese rather than slice it. We use less when we shred, but what happens in this day and age, the cheese is now shredded for us. So it's so much easier to reach your hand on this bag and overdo the cheese, because in the old days when we used to take the cheese and grate it, we would quit because it's hard to do it. But now it's much easier to do. I actually did my training in Wisconsin where they make cheese, and one of the things they said there is don't talk to people about eating less cheese because that's what they live on, that's their cheese. So again, depending on what you're doing with the cheese is how you should purchase it. So if you really need the flavor on the top of something, you should buy a good natural cheese. Grate it, slice it, whatever you're doing in order to use that. If you're going to be cooking with it, you can go to a lower fat cheese where once again other flavors will take over and you won't taste the difference in the low fat as much as if you were putting it, say, on a sandwich.
But you can taste the difference.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. I have made some macaroni and cheeses with low fat cheese or using the very low fat, trying to combine the two just to get a good product but not have something that doesn't, but most people can tell the difference in it right away. But you can see that there are so many cheeses, and as we walk down you'll see they start to slice them. They put them in what you'll see is they slice them very thin so the calorie load comes down, the fat comes down, and they're pretty much labeled. If it's going to be reduced fat, if it's going to be 40 calories, they're going to label it how it is the way they have cut it.
So they're trying to make it easier on us.
For you to know what you want to purchase
exactly
when you're going to purchase it. And then down on this shelf, we have all these foods that, well, you know, these are what the kids eat. It's all about the sliced cheese, and it's not even a real cheese product. They do call it a cheese product. It's called a cheese food. It's like a Velveeta product. And again, the one saving grace about these kinds of cheeses is they do have the equivalent of usually a glass of milk in it. So if you have someone who just doesn't like to drink milk, but they still need their calcium, it's not a bad choice. But
Let's take a look at the back, yeah.
Once again, you're going to have to take a look at your label, because that 520 rule applies again. And you can see this one is 7%. So it's right down there around that 5.
Well,
so
it
it's not
says 13% saturated fat.
Right. Then, well,
7% total fat.
I was jumping from fat down to that saturated fat.
Okay.
So you're right. So what they're telling you is out of most of the fat in this product, an awful large percentage of it is saturated. And I think with cheeses, that's what you're going to find. There's very little unsaturated fat in any cheese. So when you're looking at this product, maybe that's not the criteria you're going to use. You need to walk yourself back and say, what is the total fat, and not worry, because most of it's going to be saturated, unless it says it's a low-fat cheese. Then you might have a little bit of a difference in that product as well. Oops, I'm always forgetting where I got these things from. And as we walk down, again, let's take a peek at some of the snack kinds of cheeses, because, you know, we're really telling parents to give their kids string cheeses, or kids that are in athletics after school, because it's a protein, it's got some dairy product in it, it digests easy, and it's easy to carry along with you and eat. So if you have a son or a daughter who's in athletics after school, this is a great snack to eat before they go out to their practices, because it's easy to carry, and it's really going to give them probably more nutrition than worrying about the amount of fat that's in it, because you can buy most of these string cheeses in a low-fat product.
Yes, they're very clearly labeled,
clearly
reduced
labeled,
fat or
yes,
just regular
yes.
string cheese, so that's good.
Yep.
So let's take a look at one. And here's your regular old string cheese. Now it says it's made part skim, right?
Right, that's that part skim word that we were talking
you're
about.
Right.
And
9% total fat, 15% saturated.
right.
And that's for one stick.
For one stick. So remember though, cheese is a high-fat product, no matter how you look at it, because it says only part skim. The rest of the dairy product in it is going to be regular milk.
Of course, good protein though.
Good protein and calcium, vitamin D. So it's got some redeeming graces to it.
Now the reduced fat isn't too much less though. It's 6% total, 14% saturated fat.
Yeah.
So you're not saving a whole lot, but I guess every little bit helps.
Yeah, especially if you only eat one.
Yeah,
that's going to be the clincher too, is do you eat more than that? So.
Well, you're right. They make it so convenient for us with slicing it.
And you can see how many grated cheeses we have now. You know, you really don't have to grate your cheeses anymore. But as long as you know that you're getting a higher fat food, you know that it's got a good flavor. So just be careful with how much you're using. Try to use less of it in recipes, your sandwiches, whatever you're doing. It's a good flavor enhancer. People do love it, and for the most part, I can very rarely talk people into eating less of it. You know, it's one of those foods that's all American, and we're going to keep eating it.
True.
So enjoy your cheese, but eat less of it.
Well, next on to another product that's an all-American food is good old-fashioned milk.
Let's go down to milk. There's a lot to talk about in milk.
Now, Kathy, here we are in the milk section, and this is another mind-boggling section compared to years ago. It was so simple. Now we have different types of, percentages of fat in milk: organic milk, soy milk, almond milk, lactose-free milk. Let's get started with the 1% milk.
Okay, well, Mary, there's different dietary needs for people, and obviously that's why we've had all the variety of milk. But we used to have just the whole milk, which was what we can call it in the olden days. Now our whole milk, which, believe it or not, in this area has a red cap. It always has a red cap, and it's called red cap milk because it's whole milk. That has the most fat, most saturated fat, most cholesterol, and most calories of all these milks that we're just talking about.
25% saturated fat.
But it has its place, because children under 2 have to drink whole milk because they need the fat in their diet. Elderly people who don't get enough calories in need it. But for the average person, once you're over the age of 2, a good healthy person, child or adult, can move right into the 1% milk. In fact, even WIC today gives you the 1% or the fat-free milk. The nice thing about 1% milk is that it's got, again, all the vitamins that all the milks have, same calcium, same protein, nothing differs except the amount of saturated fat and cholesterol that is in that actual milk.
8% compared to 25%.
25% makes a big difference. And taste-wise, once again, it's one of those things people have to get used to. If you're used to whole milk and you move down and get less fat, you will taste a difference in it. But in terms of nutrition, in terms of what you need, moving to the 1% or even the fat-free is the way to go for most people. Whether you're cooking with it, drinking with it, and whatever. And you've got to kind of make the transition. Now, when they made 2% milk, remember, that came out and everybody thought it was the answer to our prayers for lower fat. It really has very little difference in the saturated fat and the amount of calories in it to whole milk.
So it's 15% saturated fat. So it is less than whole.
It's less, but again, not as good as going down to the 1%
I think you can get used to it. I did. I was raised on whole milk. And
sure, absolutely. And you can cook with it. You can do anything with the fat-free or the 1%. And there's even some diabetes research that talks about having better blood sugar control with 1% milk for some reason. I don't know what the tie-in is, but they're looking at that and trying to study that. We also know that people that get 2 to 3 servings of dairy in their diet every day have a better chance of managing their weight, believe it or not. There's some study that's going on that talks about the cellular level of metabolizing fat. So eliminating dairy products from our diet is not a great idea. Of course, I do understand people are lactose intolerant and can't tolerate the milk, the regular sugars in the milk. So that's why we can talk about what else is available for people that can't tolerate it. And we get into this whole array of the almond milks, the silks, and what these types of milks are. Again, it's almond and it's soy. Now, the almond milk is just made from ground almonds with water, and they just keep running it through it to leach out the nutrients from it. It's got both of these milks have a longer shelf life. They tend to have lower protein. They tend to have lower fat. My concern with them is that people have to make sure that they've had the calcium added to them, because almonds and soy do not have calcium in them as a normal.
Do they usually add the calcium as a result?
No, not all the time. You have to read it. The other thing about these milks is they sweeten them. So once again, you're back to looking at your calories and your sugar content, because I can show you on.
Now that's unsweetened.
This is an almond that's unsweetened, so it clearly says unsweetened on this label.
And it tells you right on the front how many calories.
And you can see with the fat is again very low on this product. But it's going to change if you pick a similar product that's sweetened, because now your sugar content's going to go up, your calories are going to go up, probably not your fat per se on this. And that's just one particular brand. So the consumer has to really look at these milks and decide, what they're looking for and which one they want to use. They are great alternatives to the lactose. They're gluten-free, typically, so people that are now trying to really watch gluten, that's a great product to choose as well. And there are the differences between organic and regular. Now, that's not a decisive concept at the moment, because I know what people are looking for is, if it says organic, are they hormone free? Is it better because they're on these farms that are, not using the fertilizers? But there's been some discussion about whether these are monitored farms, whether they're really organic. So I think, as we talk about it, the jury's still out.
Right,
I'm
not
not
sure
sure
which
which way
show on the organic,
to talk about.
I think, because that's the hot word now. Natural, organic. Is it really that?
And it applies to your produce. It applies to now your dairy products, because people are hesitant. They're a little skeptical about some of the hormones in milks and things. Well, I think the next section that we're going to look at, Mary, is the coffee creamers, because I think people have, we're drinking more coffee and teas, we're not sure what to put in it, and there's a variety to choose from. So why don't we head to the coffee creamers?
Sure, let's go. Kathy, how about we start with half and half, which most people do put in their coffee.
Sure,
and we'll compare traditional half and half to the fat-free variety. So let's take a look at the labels and see what we come up with. And it looks like they both are a 2 tablespoon serving. 2 tablespoons. And of course, the fat-free is 20 calories versus the half and half is 40. And then 5% total fat in the half and half. versus 0%. And then of course the regular half and half has 10% saturated fat versus 0. So what exactly are we getting here?
Right, because a lot of people want to know how can a creamer be fat-free. So what they're doing is if you read the ingredient labels, you'll see that in the fat-free half and half, they have to add something back in to thicken it and giving it the consistency of a cream. So what you end up having is this carrageenan gum and other kinds of chemicals that are making it a thicker product, so it does the same thing in your coffee as the regular half and half. One thing about the half and halves and people that are drinking them is the fact that you're not using much of it in a cup of coffee. But people that drink a lot of coffee over the course of a day can start to add up quite a bit. So if you have the concern about fats, that's one product. But if you're also concerned about how many chemicals and things are you drinking and adding in, that's another discsion. So I'm not sure which one.
I struggle with that because I'm like, should I just use regular half and half since I don't use much of it, and I just drink 1 cup a day, versus all the chemicals and things they have to put in to make like fake half and half is the way I look at it.
And then you have the regular creams all together, and some people say, well, should I just use regular cream? Because if you're using a regular cream, you could almost use less of it in your coffee because it is such a natural product and it lightens it right away and gives it a different flavor. But then again, that changes the parameters for people, again, adding, you know, more saturated fats to their diet, depending on what they are. And I think for people who drink 1 cup of coffee, it's probably not that relevant. But if you're a heavy coffee drinker or tea, some people even add it to their cereal. They're drinking it. And some people that have lactose intolerant are drinking it because people with lactose intolerance can sometimes tolerate the half and halves more than they can the milk. Yeah, or if, you know, so I think, again, it's a discussion for people to decide what they're using, how much they're using, and go from there. But do remember that the fat-free ones, because creams tend not to be fat-free, have to have something added to them to give them that consistency.
And just to take a look at the heavy cream, that is 17%
mostly
saturated fat.
Yes.
And the reason I'm going to mention that is a lot of recipes and soups and things call for heavy cream, but I know now I substitute.
Oh, I do too, all the time. I use the light one, or sometimes, again, I'll use the half and half in there too. And I've seen some recipes where they're actually giving you that option to switch in the fat-free half and half or something like that in place of the heavy creams.
And look what I'm noticing here with these Giant products. They put the calories right on the front, which is very helpful.
And I think I've noticed that in their products in general. And so I think that trend is, you know, to have restaurants labeling their menus, putting calories out there for people. And I think that some of the food companies are hot on that procedure to try to make it a little more easier for the shopper to just glance at the products and decide what they want. So besides the half and halves, we have this array of sweeteners and coffee flavors, and you can see that we are inundated with choices here once again, because you can go sugar-free, fat-free, low-fat, regular, and again we're back to how much are you using, what are you actually looking for, is it the flavor, is it the consistency in your milk? So, you know, as you look at the choices here, there's just a lot to pick from, and they are filled with chemicals, a lot of them. You know, the flavorings are not pure, but it depends on what you're looking for in your coffees. And I think flavored coffees right now are really, again, a very much desirable product for people.
I know I didn't drink coffee, and I'm a nurse. You know, I was surrounded by people that drink coffee in my younger days, and the only way I can drink coffee is I do like the flavoring.
Like the flavors.
And so let me ask you a question. I know one of the products that I enjoy would be this, which of course, it says natural, so I'm not sure what that means, but of course if you look on the label, this one here has 6% saturated fat. Of course the serving size is 1 tablespoon, and for somebody that maybe only uses 1 tablespoon for each serving.
And again, I think, you know, maybe what you should try to do too is measure out what a tablespoon looks like. We typically take these products
and
we think we're doing just a tablespoon, where it could be more. And if your mug is a 16-ounce mug or 12-ounce, you could be doing a lot more. I personally feel that, you know, when we talk about nutrition, we talk about eating, part of it is to enjoy what we're eating. If this is one of those things that people like, they want to put it in their coffee, they enjoy it with their coffee, make a decision. Do I want it sugar-free? Do I want it fat-free? Am I concerned about the organic? Am I concerned about the chemicals? What's the rest of my day looking like? If I drink 1 cup of coffee and I put something in it that has a little saturated fat, but the rest of the day, the rest of my food choices are not in that realm. Is this really going to be harmful? Probably not.
Well, and the other thing is this one has 5 grams of sugar, which is a little over a teaspoon.
A teaspoon, yeah.
So maybe I put a little less sugar
in your coffee.
In my coffee,
there you go.
And let this be the sweetener.
Well, then you'll have people that put this in, but then they sweeten it with an artificial sweetener.
Right.
So, you know, you're not getting that added feature in there. But as I look at the shelf and I look at the number of products out here, you know that there's choices, once again, of fat-free, sugar-free, low-fat, regular. So again, making that decision on what's going to fit into the big picture for the day for you rather than zeroing in on every little product. I think that's important.
You know, and that's where I struggle, is this one says milk and cream, sugar, natural flavor. It sounds like there's a little less in it, because it kind of bothers me that a lot of these products just seem chock full of chemicals.
Well, and I
flavorings.
wonder what natural flavor is. It's probably still the natural chemical. So, you know, they're not putting a hazelnut definitely in hazelnut flavor, so they're putting the chemical configuration of hazelnut. But, well, again, semantics, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, let's take a look at one of these others and see, compare it. One that looks like it's, well, of course you had the fat-free Coffee Mate variety.
And there are some that are actually lactose-free. This one is probably lactose-free.
And that has 0 fat.
0 fat.
And still only 5 grams of sugar. So you're definitely getting the same in terms of sweetness, but no fat.
But no fat.
So, but then,
and again, a lactose-free product. So if you're going to sweeten, if you're going to be putting something in your milk, in your coffee that you don't want to have the milk in it, probably the coffee creamers would be better.
And the ingredient list is much longer because it contains carrageenan and those.
And when we look down at the regular half and half and the regular cream, it's pretty much just the dairy product. Once they start altering what the product is, or if it's fat-free, sugar-free, the chemicals and the additives start coming in because they have to develop an acceptable flavor and acceptable consistency that you're going to want in that product. So it does change the whole feature of the product.
So what's your overall recommendation with all this?
Well, I use the fat-free half and half in my coffee, and primarily because I don't like my coffee sweet. And so a lot of the flavors are too sweet for me. But I think if I was doing a dessert coffee, I'd probably still head down to the flavors but go on the fat-free. I'm not as the sugar-free person because I'd rather not have the artificial sweeteners in there. But again, personal preference. So as advice for the consumer, think about what you do in the big picture and how your flavors and your substitutes and things you're using fit into your whole day.
And obviously with creamers, we're not talking a large amount of flavoring and such added. So.
Except for the folks that do drink upwards of
several cups of coffee.
But then we may have to talk to them about the caffeine overload, and that's a whole other topic.
Well, Kathy, thank you so much for coming again and talking to us about how to read nutrition labels, which is so important in putting the right kind of foods into our body. I know you have a busy schedule, and I really appreciate you coming in.
Thank you, Mary. It was a delightful day.
And of course, we need to thank Giant Food for allowing us to come here and film this very important program.
Sounds good.
And thank you for joining us for this edition of Focus on Health here on PAC 14.
Focus on Health is sponsored by Peninsula Regional Medical Center, a proud supporter of PAC 14 programming.
Hi, I'm Peggy Nalepa, President and CEO of Peninsula Regional Medical Center. PRMC is privileged to partner with PAC 14 to provide educational healthcare programming for the Delmarva region. Peninsula Regional Medical Center, a proud supporter of PAC 14 and public access television.